Welcome to No Sanity Required from the Ministry of Snowbird Wilderness Outfitters, a podcast about the Bible, culture, and stories from around the globe.
Okay, so we have three kind of topics: marriage, ministry, and parenting.
Okay.
All things you guys are bomb at, killing it. So let's start with marriage. So for the people that don't know y'all personally, can you walk through like how you guys met, how you guys ended up together, stuff like that?
Little's version and my version. This is how this works. It's just, I think that's probably everybody's story, the two different perspectives. So I don't know what works better for you to go first, for me to go first.
You go first.
All right,
It'd be
so
more funny if you go first.
So I was a sophomore in college. Little was a freshman. I was on the basketball team. She was a really good basketball player. She was like a highly recruited player. I was just on the team. So I was probably a miracle that I was even there. But I was with a couple of friends of mine. One was a guy named Joey Thacker, and we were coming out of a shoot-around in the arena where we played ball. It was a big arena, 10,000 seats in there. Come out, and we're done with our shooting practice. This is the beginning of the school year, and we're walking around the top of the arena. We stop and we sit down to watch. The girls' team has come out to do a shooting practice. This wouldn't have been a formal practice. It would have been like, think of a pickup basketball game. And I always make the joke that Little came down the court, this freshman, didn't know who she was. There was a couple new girls on the team, and she had a crossover, a spin move, and I was in love.
High standards.
she really did. Like she was balling out, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I literally said to my buddy Joey Thacker, I was like, if that girl right there is from Georgia, I'm gonna marry her. It's crazy. You can't script stuff like this.
And he was from Georgia too, right?
No, Joey was
his
not, but his girlfriend
Got it.
was. Yeah, he was dating a girl at the time that was from Georgia is what it was.
Why
And
a Georgia girl?
I had this thing in my
Like
mind.
we said, high standards.
I had a thing in my mind that I wanted to marry a girl from Georgia because I don't know if people still do this. Back then they called girls from Georgia Peaches. And, North Carolina and Georgia border. It's not like, I don't know. I just always thought I wanted to marry a girl from Georgia. I don't know. I don't even remember the thought process. But I remember saying that to him, and he was dating a girl from Georgia. And I was like, that girl's from Georgia. Anyway, this is, by the way, folks, this is not prescriptive. This is not how you do it.
Maybe.
But it worked. And so anyway, but we didn't start dating then. He just laughed. He kind of laughed it off. And then I was paying attention to Little, and I was seeing her. And that was around the time the Lord was drawing me into a relationship with himself. I wasn't a Christian at that point. If I wasn't walking with the Lord. I was kind of seeking. And so over the next few months, the Lord was dealing with me. And now I think there's a caveat. I was a pretty wild guy, like crazy. Not just wild, like worldly wild. Somewhat worldly, but just crazy. Like, I don't even know how to describe me that era, the 20-year-old, 19-year-old version of me, 19, 20-year-old version. It was just wild.
Like just kind of fights all the time. Got kicked out of intramural sports.
I did get in a lot of fights. I grew up in
crazy.
Crazy.
Just like backwards crazy.
I was backwards crazy. I think I didn't have good parameters. I'd grown up in the southern Appalachians, western North Carolina, in this tiny little community called Bethel, which is a lot like Andrews. I'd never seen anything outside of, and so moving to a big university campus and meeting people from all over, I was just overwhelmed, and I just didn't have a good social awareness and cultural content. I was just wild. I was uninhibited. And so anyway, I had noticed Little. I started paying attention. I'll pause and let her tell the next part of the story because before she does, so when you're freshman, sophomore in college, you have these massive classroom sizes. Like there will be 300 people in a class, these freshman classes you have to take. I had a class here directly across the hall. She had a class, and I realized she was going in and out of there. I was like, I got to go talk to this girl at some point.
So Joey, who was on his team, who he told that to, his girlfriend was on my hall. She came to me and she's like, Little, Joey has his friend and his name's Brody, and he said he told Joey he wants to marry you. I was a freshman. I was 17. And and then we met one time, I think, my first semester, my freshman year, and then that was really it. And he acted super stable and everything for that intro. So then Christmas came around, I guess.
Yeah.
And I guess he had been trying to like, well, okay, so that freshman class, was that first semester?
No, it was the next semester.
Okay. Yeah, so after at Christmas, I guess he was like, all right, let's try this out and then do this thing. So he like started just coming up to me and saying, so my maiden name was Coleman. So, hey, Jenny Coleman, I'm in love with you. I'm going to marry you. Just like would just randomly walk up. And it was funny because everybody at Liberty, they like try to look J. Crew-ish, like, you know. And he worked, he taught a horsemanship class for Liberty. You could get a 1 hour credit. And he and Matt Jones taught that class. And so they had like a work permit. So when they came to class, they didn't have to do the attire that everybody else. So he would show up in boots with just stuff all over them. Pro rodeo Wranglers, like super tight. Like a flannel cut off. And then a hat like cupped down like this. Although like it was kind of strange. It was cool because it was like different to me because everybody kind of was like the same person. So I wasn't like thrown off by that or whatever. But yeah, and so he started just coming in those big old classes and like running in while the professor was praying and he would run in and tell me he was in love with me and then run out. So that went on for that whole semester, and all my basketball girls loved him. They thought it was just the funniest thing. So they were getting endeared to him, and and he would like he would find like he had this whole posse of rednecks that would follow us around and just like stupid all the time, and like we'd go in Walmart and then they'd be in Walmart and acting all stupid and throwing stuff at us like they were 12, and so that was like. That was the pursuit that was going on for the.
I always think of the Forrest Gump line when he said, because Little's name is Jenny, and there's like a line in Forrest Gump where he's like, "I don't know a lot, but I know I love you, Jenny."
Are you kidding me?
Like it sounds like I was a complete buffoon imbecile, and I kind of was.
Yeah.
Like,
but he would also do like, there's this really jerkish guy on the baseball team, and he was trying to like hang out with me. We'd gone out one time, and we were in this big hall, and we were talking, and, like, he was, like, right here, and I was right here. Big, just hall with all these people. And Brody literally, like, walks and puts his face right in between us and just starts talking to me. And Bill's like, what's up? And then he just kind of leaves.
A hip check.
And then Brody just talks to me for a while. So, like, stuff like that, you know, it was just different than, like, all the boring stuff that was going on otherwise. So, yeah, I guess it worked, obviously.
He was putting his moves on.
Okay, so you guys started dating like Christmas semester, like spring semester?
No, he just started acting like that at Christmas, and he did it the whole semester, like the whole second semester. And then maybe around spring break, he like asked me out. And well, he'd asked me out the whole time, but I said no. And then I said, okay, let's go out. So we went and saw Silence of the Lambs.
No, the first date we rode. That was like a couple days later.
Yeah. We went. He worked at the horse farm, so we went rode horses.
Yeah.
Had some Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yes. Had saddlebags. He got a bucket of KFC, and we rode to the top of the mountain.
Oh yeah. So yeah, we did that, and it was fun. Like I enjoyed it. And then at the end of the date, he was like, "So you know, I told you I want to marry you. So if you don't want to marry me, we probably don't need to hang out anymore." And out of my mouth just came, well, okay.
Literally, that's what she said.
It didn't feel like weird or like contradictory. I mean, I don't know. I guess the Lord was just like bringing it together in his own way. But
that's what I think in hindsight. We were both Little and I were both out of the box people. I think neither one of us were like just normal.
I'm so normal.
And I think the Lord was just orchestrating things that were bigger than we realized in the moment. Like, not to over spiritualize it, but it's the first time I ever prayed in my life about, because it was during that time from the basketball thing, like in August, till we went on that first date. That's the time where the Lord was drawing me, and I was starting to respond to Him. And I started to pray specifically for Little. And I think I'm such a black and white person that when I started praying for her, to me, then it was like, oh, yeah, I'm praying for this girl, so we're going to get married. Like, I know that sounds like I would never teach students to do that now. But the Lord just did a unique work with us, I think. So it's always, when people ask us to tell the story, I feel like there's so many caveats to it because it's just not a normal romance or relationship story. I think the Lord was opening my heart to want to pursue Little, but I was so simple. Like, I have a guy gave me a plaque that was when we were dating, and it's been in my study ever since, and it says, I have one simple philosophy: it's really funny, empty what's full, fill what's empty, scratch where it itches. And he said, I saw this and it made me think of you, because it's like, something needs to be done, you just do it. You don't complicate things. You just like, let's go. And I think that's always been kind of just the way I'm wired. And so in my mind, when I started praying for Little, I was like, yeah, I like her. I wasn't interested in like dating. I was never like into dating and having a girlfriend. And so it's kind of a crazy story, but
Yeah. So by the end of my freshman year, like we knew we were supposed to get married. My mom actually came up to visit me on spring break or something, and I was like, hey, I got this guy you need to meet. And she said when she met him and saw us interact, she's like, oh my goodness, this is like who she's going to marry. She's going to marry this redneck. I can't believe it. She said it was the most obvious thing ever. So,
Wow.
yeah, it happened fast.
Yeah.
Like from,
yeah,
in a month.
yeah, it was a month. Yeah.
So then we dated my sophomore year. We're engaged my junior year, and then married before my senior year at Liberty.
Yeah. That's
That's
it.
it.
That's our story.
Sweet. What made you guys realize that this is who I'm supposed to marry? You kind of touched on that earlier, just like the Lord softening your heart, drawing you guys close. Is there anything else that sticks out?
For me, honestly, I don't know if you know this, but we had gone camping with a bunch of people, and we were at Biscuitville, get in the drive-thru. And I remember you're ordering, and we were in your little Toyota truck, and I remember just thinking, like, this is just crazy, and the Lord just being like, settle into this. This is who you're going to marry. It was like not audible, but audible,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's when it was kind of went down.
Yeah, it was for me very simple. Just I didn't want to date around, and once I was like, the Lord had put Little on my heart and my radar. I don't ever remember thinking I want to be with anyone else ever. Yeah, just pretty simple. Pretty simple.
So, how long have you guys been married?
30 years.
30 years. Do you have any advice that you would give to a younger married couple?
I think maybe, so when we were at Liberty, I was a senior, and he was actually graduated and working at a camp up in Virginia. And we found a married couple, Lance and Kelly Bingham. And Lance was the track coach at Liberty. And Still is. But he was from Texas and farmed. It was a cattle farmer. So somehow Brody and him made the connection. They were trying to find hay, the same place or something. And Lance is like a very intentional, strong Christian man. And he just like, I guess, probably pursued Brody and was like, oh, you're newly married. Why don't you come hang out with my wife and I? And they had 2 kids at the time. Brittany was like, 5 or 6, and Cody was maybe 2 or something. And so we didn't do it like tons, I don't think it has to be like every week, can we meet with you guys, but just like a natural, hey, we got nothing to do this night. What are you guys doing? And we would just go over there and eat. Kelly would make jalapeno burgers and homemade ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like they would, feed us like nuggets about the Lord and marriage and stuff, but it was also, they were very intentional with their kids, and, they didn't just fluff them off and act like they didn't matter. And so it was really cool, like, just seeing that. For me, honestly, that was a really big part of, oh, this is doable, and this is simply how it can look, So I think, asking the Lord to provide something like that, and if it's His will, He will give you a, married couple or something that you can kind of just hang out with and get some pointers. I think that's a big deal. Also, getting in a church or just something where there's some accountability, where, because, the first little bits of marriage, I think if things don't go how you expect, you can start doubting a zillion things. So, like, having somebody that's outside of that bubble that can be like, that's not right. You're crazy. What are you saying? Like having just somebody that's stable, that you trust and the Lord is in, So
Yeah.
I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, and I would also encourage people. Little and I were talking last night with Tara Scott, Austin's wife, about expectations. Oftentimes in our marriage, I think people have had an expectation of how we were going to invest in them, and we weren't able to do that because we have our own children and ministry. And so for Lance and Kelly, we pursued them as much as they pursued us. They opened themselves to us, but then we would swing by their house. We would go, we would watch their kids for them for free. They got free babysitting out of the deal, because we're like, hey, we'll come over, if they had to go somewhere, be somewhere. And I would just say, when you find that older couple, and they could be 10 years ahead of you, Lance and Kelly are 10 years older than us, then just gently pursue them and learn from them, and pay attention to how they do things. There's so much to learn from just observing. Don't have an expectation that someone's going to sit down across from you and mentor you in every little facet of life. Just be in the Word, be saturated in the Word, love Jesus and His Word, and then pay attention to people that are doing it right and learn from them.
How have you guys handled some challenges or disagreements in your relationship?
We really haven't had tons.
We get along pretty good.
I made him sleep outside in February one night when we were first married. He almost froze to death.
This is like the best. It's really the only intense blow up we ever had. We've been married.
It was silly though.
Oh, completely.
I was really insecure, and he was just out with his brother and some friends. Like after one of my games, just shooting around, and he came in at like 2 a.m, and I'm like, if you're gonna do that, here's your sleeping bag. See you in the morning. Click, lock the door.
I was like,
about 5 a.m, I hear, Little, can I please come in? I'm freezing.
Because she gave me like one of those little kid Walmart camp out sleeping bags. I don't know where that thing came from.
It was so cold.
Yeah, because it's basketball season. It was like February in Central Virginia. It was probably in the 20s, and I curled up. And my old truck was like a little 2-seat Toyota. You couldn't even. And so I curled up. I tried to make a soft bed out of leaves, and I was in sweaty. What it was after her game, I was friends with all the guys that would do set up and tear down, the event staff. And when that was over, my brother was in town visiting, and he was staying with a buddy. And so we ended up like midnight. We started playing basketball. We stayed and helped those guys tear everything down. Played basketball till 1:30. So I'm sweaty, and I'm in that little sleeping bag. Finally, I was like, I'm going to die. And we were so cold. And we're so poor. I remember thinking I should get in my truck and run the heater, but I had like 1/8 of a tank of gas, and it needed to get me all week because I was working like a construction job, and so I finally was like, I've got to go inside.
Yeah, but throughout the years, I think on a more serious note, whenever I would have a scratch in my spirit about something, anything that I maybe had a qualm with him about or something, what I do or did do and try to still do is not really like bring it up or let it consume me and wait like a whole week, because a lot, with ladies, we can be drama-ish with a lot of stuff, and our perspective can get out of whack. So yeah, I try to just like for a week just let it sit, and if the Lord keeps like bringing it to my mind, then I think at that point I can become more like humble about it if it's a genuine concern. And He's always like very willing to listen. And I think there's been times when even He was like, thought that I maybe even wasn't right about something. And it's usually small stuff, but He would still, he's just still willing to like apologize and what I need to do, or, I think if you're just like putting the other person first, stuff just levels out. It really does.
Yeah, I think this is like maybe one of the big nuggets of this interview or this podcast would be, I want to speak for just a minute to that, because I think it brings up an important principle, and there are things about our relationship that may not work for other people, but the thing about a biblical principle is it works for all people in all places in all times. That's what a biblical principle is. So it doesn't matter what cultural context, what language you speak, what your background is. There are things about us that wouldn't work for other people. But the biblical principles are important, and I think this brings up an important principle we've learned that initially seemed counterintuitive or counter-biblical to me, and I used to think of that verse that says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. And I remember early in our marriage having a couple of situations where I was like, we have to solve this before we go to bed. Because I was a newer Christian. I was taking this so literal. We got to figure this out. And then Little wasn't ready her heart was not in a place to work through it. She's the slower processor. And she needed to process that, and she was taking it before the Lord. And I realized, okay, if she's taking this before the Lord, then she's not letting the sun go down on her anger. And here's the principle is that there's oftentimes we don't resolve something before we go to bed. It may be 6 sleeps from now before we resolve it or talk through it. But we're committed to getting it solved. We're committed to working through it. And for me, it stretched me to realize, okay, there are going to be times where I need to step back and just let the Lord stir and work in Little's heart. And then in that time, I'm praying for her, and I'm praying and seeking the Lord for my own wisdom until we're at a point where, okay, let's sit down and talk through this. And a lot of times it takes care of itself. We don't even have to talk through it. About a year or two, probably 3 or 4 years ago now. I remember we were standing down there by the pond, and I remember saying, something's wrong. And Little said, I'm not ready to talk about it. And I remember having this piece of, okay, the Lord's ready for her to talk about it. We'll talk about it. And I prayed for her for the next 4 days, and then we never talked about it.
I have no clue. I don't remember that at all.
I mean, it was like
it
one of those things where the Lord I knew like the Lord just resolved it. And so at that point, I don't need to dig that. I think the tendency is, why are you aggravated, or why are you mad at me, or why did you say that? It's like we have to give room for the Holy Spirit to work in our spouse's life. I mean, Ephesians 5, the whole point of the text on marriage is my number one dream and passion and vision and prayer for Little is that she grows deeper in her relationship with the Lord, because that's where her security, her identity, her healing, her hope, her peace, all that comes from. It doesn't come from me. I'm not the source of any of those things. So if the Lord's stirring and working in her, why would I want to get in the middle of that and try to, come on, we got to sort it out, or we got to, it's like, no, just keep pressing into Christ, and I'm going to pray for you, and I'm going to press into Christ. And so often the Lord just brings resolve,
That's good. Even this past summer, Anna Rose's breakout or her session kind of touched on that, and I thought it was so good. I feel like a lot of times girls especially would be like, oh, I'm going to get married and everything's going to be perfect. Like my husband's going to fulfill all these needs for me, or, but I think that's good. Just good advice all around.
And I think with that, so in a marriage, you have the opportunity for an insecurity to be magnified or reduced. It's probably not going to go away. But as married husband and wife, what I've learned is insecurities I have, they don't go away, but my relationship with Little will either magnify them or reduce them. And if I'm walking in the flesh or I'm being selfish, it magnifies the insecurity. But if I'm walking in the spirit and I'm loving my wife more than I love myself and trying to serve her, then it reduces that problem and it becomes very manageable. And I realize, oh, the Lord's given me power over this. It goes both ways.
That's good. Yeah, because it can even be like a power thing where I could go, oh, I can have some sort of, like effect on how you're handling your insecurity or whatever, and it can be if I'm not in the Word and then, seeking the Lord, I can use it for my advantage if I'm being selfish with it.
I remember someone in our family, in an older generation, telling us a story one time where his mom had weaponized something like that against his dad, and then said to him, "You're just like your dad."
Yeah.
It was like that was a jab.
Yeah.
And it's like, not rather than weaponizing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How do you guys keep Christ at the center of your marriage?
Yeah, that's a pretty simple one. I mean, every morning I sit right there on that sofa and just, I'm in the Word, and even before I read, I'll just kind of sit there and just kind of like honor the Lord and just acknowledge and ponder like on Him and let Him kind of like separate, okay, you don't need to worry about this. Pray hard about this, and just come to the Lord with anything that's just laid on my heart. And from that point on, it's just like you're seeing through His eyes, and it's, it's not easy, but you got the Lord's help, for your day,
Yeah.
marriage.
And I sit right here. This is my spot. It's literally
Yeah.
where I sit. Little sits there. I sit here. I usually get up when it's still dark and nobody's stirring in the house. And just, if you spend time at the feet of Jesus, have my reading Bible is not my preaching Bible. I just keep it right behind the couch. Just take it out. My big print Bible, now that I'm old, can't see good, And all I do, I don't mark it up or anything. I don't write. For me, it's just for me. I don't journal. I just read the scripture slowly. And I imagine I drink cold water and I read the Bible. And for me, it's a visual of the way this water is hydrating me. The scripture is bringing nourishment and hydration to my soul. And so then you start with a well-hydrated soul from the living water of scripture. That's the image that I picture. And Little does the same thing.
Yeah, I was listening to this interview the other day, and the lady was saying, like, when you go to Olive Garden and there's so many good things to eat, and, you take a while to figure out what you want, but then they bring all that bread, and it's like you get so full on that bread. When your food comes, you're like, oh, I gotta just take this home. It's not as, like, doesn't look as appealing as it did before. And she was just kind of saying, like, if you do that in the morning with, like, it says the word is, bread and, like, nourishment. It's like if you seek that in the morning, then you don't live like entitled throughout your day. It's like the Lord's enough, and you're not self-seeking, and it's He fills you up, and things that seemed appealing miraculously don't. So
Yeah. This kind of leads into the next question, but what are some like habits or things that you guys do to keep yourself connected and just, stay connected through these 30 years of marriage?
we've been polar plunging. That doesn't keep us connected, though. That just makes me cold.
We just do our lives together. Like, we don't. I think, again, a lot of our answers are simple.
Yeah.
We don't have divided anything. The only thing that's separate is I think because of the pull on my life from the outside, I require a whole lot of solitude. And so I get that early in the morning or throughout the day. I pull away because when I'm home, I want to be home, engaged. And then we just do everything together. I think that may not be helpful because it's not like we don't work at that. I just think 30 years into this, like from day one, we've always just chosen to live our lives completely together. And I think you see that with older couples that are 50 years married. The ones that are healthy, they've just shared their lives. I think people in our society tend to run in two different lanes, different directions. And
Yeah, and could you read Isaiah, like something in Isaiah?
yeah.
Like when you said like a habit or a practice, like in practice, I instantly go to like disciplines and stuff, so like praying, journaling, but then like fasting is one of those. And I think that something that is real important that we do together that connects us, even though a lot of times we're doing it separate from each other, is can you read like 6 through 8?
6 through 8.
Yeah, it's Isaiah 58.
Isaiah 58.
Yeah.
6 through 8. Is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke? Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh, then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thine health shall spring forth speedily, and thy righteousness shall go before thee. The glory of the Lord shall be thy reward.
Yeah, and that's my granddad's King James Bible, but like that, it says that's the fast of the Lord's desires. Dude.
You made it 35 minutes. Me too.
But say something.
Take over.
Okay, but like honestly, like that's a practice that the Lord, like the Lord calls us to fast, and you think, oh, don't eat. Find something that you want to sacrifice and give that to the Lord. Don't look in a mirror for a week if you're a girl, or don't wear makeup or whatever. But the Lord says like that's the fast, like that's
The King James is beautiful language.
Yeah, you can read it. You're like thou. But yeah, it's cool because it's like it says if you like do those things, if you give to ministry in those ways, like I'm gonna give you healing in your marriage, past trauma in your life, whatever you need healing in. You do these things and you let that ministry connect you. Like you're not gonna have strains in your marriage. You're not gonna have I'm gonna direct you in parenting. If you screw up, I'm gonna heal that and direct you differently. It's like just really clear promises from the Lord. So
it's what I was saying earlier about it's a principle that anybody can hold on to. Yeah.
I think it's super encouraging just to hear how simple, I'm in the phase of life where a ton of my friends are getting married, and on the website that you like RSVP, it always asks like any advice for the future couple or whatever. And I feel like just in general, people are just kind of searching for like a set of rules or this something super
profound,
specific that'll just make their marriage perfect. But it's just encouraging to hear like you guys just are faithful and get in the Word, and like it's not even that you sit down and do a 45-minute Bible study together. It's just like you're so invested in the Word, which is obviously going to draw you guys together, and that conversation is just going to happen naturally. It's not like you guys are having to force spiritual conversations, or like it's just cool to see how simple and easy, and I mean not easy but just simple, you guys have made it. And I mean it's shown. 30 years of marriage is crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy how often we'll be trying to talk to a couple that's in crisis or they're struggling, and we go away from that and we're like, they're making this way too complicated. They're just making this way too complicated. It's two selfish people typically wanting what they want. And if you can just not complicate it, it's like, just love this person the way you want to be loved, and love them the way you want for me too, even before we were parents, because we were married almost 6 years when Kilby was born. And I can remember even early thinking, I want to love Little the way I would want my daughter to be loved, you know. How would I want my daughter to be loved? That's how I want to love Little. And it's not complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Y'all have anything else to add on the marriage part? If not, we can move on to ministry.
I do think one thing that I like for you to talk about is I always get the phraseology wrong where you talk about keeping a short account.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Short accounts.
Yeah. Like early on in our marriage, he would do something and I would so my family was not very like confrontational or just kind of more private. And so I wasn't used to like talking about anything if something was like, getting to me. So early on when something would kind of be a problem, I would just like hold on to it. But obviously like he knew me, so he was like, knew something was up and he'd ask me, be like, nothing. And so and it would be like 3 days later, and at that point it almost seems silly, like when I bring it up, I'll be like, that was silly, and have to like tell him. So just like keeping short accounts of if your feelings are hurt or if you thought that whatever, just like go ahead and making that known and then, talking through it and not just holding on to stuff.
Yeah,
especially early on.
Yeah, when you're forming the foundation. There's times where I can remember going to Little and saying, hey, I may be way off on this. So if you tell me I am, then I'll bury it right here. And then I would say what I was hurt or frustrated or discouraged or whatever. And she would either go, huh, yeah, I can see how that would be hurtful. Or she'd go, what? You shouldn't think that. That's not true. And then I would accept, like I was committed to accepting. You have to trust each other. And I'll be like, okay, I trust that. She said, no, there's nothing to that. Then that's all in my head and it's in my flesh. I'm burying that and moving on and I don't look back at it. Or she might go, huh, I can see where that would be hurtful. And I would go, oh, that feels so good that you recognize, and then we work through it, talk through it. Usually we don't have to talk through it. Just that was enough for me to go, oh, okay, I feel like the Lord heard me and she responded. So just having those conversations, but not coming to my wife with an expectation of here's where I'm frustrated or here's where my feelings are hurt or I got a grievance or a complaint. And then if I don't like her response, then it turns into a fight.
Yeah, it's kind of like when Hannah when Hannah was barren and she went to the temple and asked the Lord for a child. And it said before, like she hadn't eaten. She was so upset that she didn't have a child. She was like wailing and he thought that she was drunk. That's how like much her heart was coming out and whatever sound she was making. And but it says like that she went to the temple and laid it at the Lord's feet and then she walked away and ate. So it's like when you have to go to your spouse about something, like, first of all, like going to the Lord about it, of course, but then once you like make that known, like trust the Lord in it, whatever way.
Good stuff. Very encouraging. So you guys have been in ministry just about as long as you guys have been married, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We really
That's
have.
crazy.
It's crazy.
I don't think I've ever thought of it that way.
Well, it's funny because the way we got into ministry was my degree was in criminal justice. I thought I wanted to be like a park ranger or a game warden. Here we live right outside the Smokies, and so I always wanted to do something like that. And then I remember setting up to do my internship my senior year of college with U.S. Marshal Service. And about a week into it, I quit the internship. I was like, I don't want to do this. It was like nothing against guys in law enforcement, but I was like, it's not what I want to do with my life. I just realized it. And again, it goes back to we're so simple. Everything's black and white for me. I wasn't quitting because they weren't dependent on me. I was going to do this internship where I was going to shred paper for 10 weeks and get 6 credit hours for it. And I went and talked to the marshal. His name was Marshal Jenkins. He was at the Asheville, North Carolina office. And I remember he was about 6'5". He was skinny, about 65 years old. This was in the mid-90s. I remember he was a chain smoker. He wore cowboy boots. He's like something out of an old Western movie or something. His name was Marshall Jenkins. I remember walking in there to his office, and it was as big as this room. And I said, Marshall Jenkins, I don't think I want to be a marshal. He's like, well, son, you don't need to be doing this internship then. I remember, he was smoking. And this is how long ago this was. He's in his office smoking. And I went and got a job for a buddy of mine that had a landscaping company, and I cut grass all summer. And I remember I just didn't know what we were going to do, but I got this job, and I was working in the outdoors, and I got a call. We got married later that summer, and I got a call from a guy at a camp that said, "Hey, your name was given to me," and I went and interviewed, and it was a job that was like construction, maintenance, behind the scenes. It wasn't preaching, teaching, anything like that, and just took that job. And we'd only been married about 3 months, but I remember telling the guy I was working for, hey, I'm leaving, I'm going to go work in ministry. And it was like, in my mind, ministry was, it was like a dude ranch, so I was going to be shoeing horses and cutting hay, and we were going to be we were building a lake and doing a waterfront program. I wasn't preaching, I wasn't working with students. And it's a good principle that ministry is not just preaching. Ministry is not just doing missions. Ministry is taking your skills and your gifts and your calling. And that's how we started in ministry was, hey, let's use the gifts God's given us and let's connect with students. And we got married in August of 94. And that was in November of 94. So just a few months in.
Yeah, but it was cool though, because even doing that, so we ran the ranch side of it. And so we got to hire our crew. And one of those, so Josh Ray is a pastor of a church that still brings his kids to camp. He's had 2 of his kids work at camp. Austin Rammel, Ari Rammel's dad, was on our crew. Susie Umflett, who's Malachi Fletcher's and Micah's and all of their moms.
Yep. Rodenheiser's.
Yeah, it's like it's crazy. Yeah. Just like piecing this together,
it's
but
crazy.
That too. And so they lived. It was a big ranch house, and so actually the first summer we lived in the hay barn and let them all have the ranch house, which was fun. We put Christmas lights up and stuff. But then when it got cold, we moved into the ranch house. So it's just we were just living with those single folk and made really strong ties with those people.
Yeah.
So it's cool.
It is. That was 30 years ago. And
all
Danielle,
those people. Yeah.
All those people's kids are working at Snowbird in the last 2 summers.
Yeah.
So full circle.
Yeah, I remember we had we did horseback rides. I lifeguarded at the lake. But we didn't have any ministry, duties. But I remember the Lord slowly, we would end up meandering over to the services and talking to campers, and he was just kind of giving us a taste, of this is, and just pulling our heartstrings towards that. And I remember towards the end of the last summer, I remember leading a girl to the Lord over there, and it was just bizarre. And yeah, I think it was just
there was. I think before we took that position, I remember it was the inaugural season of the WNBA, and there was a potential opportunity. Little was working through they have the combine, and she was at the WNBA combine, and I knew I could get work anywhere. And I remember we had this conversation about, hey, if you have an opportunity to go play pro ball, I can go anywhere and swing a hammer. I can get a job on a framing crew, a landscaping crew. And I remember wrestling through and playing around with that. And then her senior season is when we were married and I got this job. And man, the Lord turned our whole world 180. And we knew over the next year, this is what we want to do.
I think sometimes people, the Lord brings a ministry opportunity and people think they have to pray about it. And it's here's the open door, walk through it.
Yes.
If I'm going to shut it, I'll shut it eventually. But I know there can be overcommitment. I know there's other, parts to this conversation, but for us, it was just, I remember I was working at J. Crew, in that where you take orders. I would do the night shift or something crazy. And I remember Brody called me or something. There wasn't phones. I don't know how you.
I
He
called you
called
on
me
a
on my break or
landline.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Hey, your dad wants to start a camp and on grandma's land." Like he talked to me about it. He's like, "Oh yeah, because so we had there was a professor I think at Liberty or some rich ranch guy that had offered for us to live on his ranch and basically take care of his ranch, and it was like the dream for us. We were like cowgirls at that point. We're like, this is it, you know. He's like, I'll give you a farm truck, this will be your house, whatever. I remember like it seemed legit, and so that had just been offered, and then he calls and was like, hey, your dad wants to start a camp on your grandma's property. And I was like, yeah, okay, let's do that. And so, you know, it was just like, okay, here it is, let's go. And I think when you start praying through like for stuff, you kind of get your own input instead of the Lord's.
Yeah.
I think fear can come in that and really mess with your decisions. And yeah.
And you never know. Like, even that whole thing started because Little's dad had come up to visit. The guy that had brought us on at that camp was leaving ministry and was looking to sell that camp for profit, to sell it. And I remember talking to Little's dad and saying, do you think you could get the finance and go raise the money, get the finance, and we could take this thing over? And he tried, and then he said, he used to he'd call people, he'd do this to everybody, he'd call you Buddy Bo. Remember that?
Yeah.
And he'd call and say, hey, Buddy Bo, I don't think I'm gonna be able to pull it off. And I was like, all right, well, let's just keep praying about it. And we had several conversations about what if, and then it just didn't seem like it's going to go anywhere. And yeah, he called and said, I think we can do this. It's just crazy that it was a simple conversation here and there, and you look back and the Lord was completely turning your life. Even the way we ended up at that camp was that guy called me and said, hey, I need somebody to come work. And that was, to me, it was going to be a temporary job. Every little step the Lord's orchestrating.
Yeah. What advice do you guys have for other couples who may feel called into ministry?
Yeah, kind of the whole thing about, yeah, if the door's open, I mean, like, if it's a ministry opportunity, you know, of course, like, check it out, make sure it's, you know, honoring the Lord with what they're doing and stuff. But I feel like if the Lord presents it, head that direction. And
And I think I was talking to someone this week who was praying about a new ministry opportunity, and he's been in secular corporate work, and the Lord's seems to be opening a door. And he said, I don't know, I don't want to do this because of my flesh. And I said, I hear people say that a lot, where they're like, I don't want to do this just because I want to, or I don't want it to be a fleshly desire. And I think that's a wrong idea. Like, people get confused. The scripture tells us what's of the flesh. The scripture in two places, Romans 8 and Galatians 5, both those say the spirit desires what is contrary to so Galatians 5 says the spirit desires what is contrary to the flesh. The flesh desires what is contrary to the spirit. And then Romans 8 says the mind set on the spirit is life and peace. The mind set on the flesh is death. So you just go, is this thing that I'm desiring, does it line up with the spirit or with that? Don't say the flesh, say with that which brings death. Does this desire to go into ministry, is that going to bring death, or does it seem to be that which is going to bring life? And don't overcomplicate it. And then, yeah, what Little's saying about, is the door open? And a lot of times the door is not even open, it's just cracked, you know, but the Lord wants us to push, and it's not sometimes it's a wide open door standing there. Sometimes you got to push hard to get through it. Little and I mean, one of my favorite parts of our life together is we moved to the property that Snowbird sits on, just the two of us, and lived there for a year while her parents were still in the Atlanta area. And they had gone full time with Snowbird, but developing a ministry plan, and we moved to the property and just started clearing trees. There was not a camper anywhere on the radar. Cutting trees down. We dug footers for the first cabin. We built it. We're hauling wood to the sawmill so we wouldn't have to buy lumber, but we could build the cabin with our own, wood. And it was a long process. And she was working at a shoe store in town, and I was doing side work, hanging
We had
drop.
no running water for 3 years.
No running water. No running water in that old cabin.
Yeah.
No insulation. We wrap it in plastic,
Yeah.
wood stove in the middle.
We
all
almost
winter.
burned it down one time.
Yeah, we did. We
Crazy.
almost burned the cabin down. And then we would go into the creek, take flat creek stone out of the creek, fill our truck bed up with it, drive it, and sell it to a landscaping outfit for $75 for a truckload of creek rock. And that would be money for groceries for that week.
Yeah, and it was so fun because,
Loved it.
it was just like, it is what you make it.
Mm-hmm. I remember
just
cutting
made
down.
it fun. It was
just
fun.
fun. Everything about it was.
You could have made it whatever you wanted. My toes were freezing in that water. But you make it what you want it.
Yeah, because Little's cold-natured, and she had to stand in the creek. We had 5-gallon buckets, and she would stand in the creek and put these and they had to be a certain size, thickness, and she'd put 4 or 5 rocks in each bucket. I would walk up the bank, dump them into my truck bed while she's filling the next bucket up. I'd carry the empty buckets down, pick up the buckets of rocks, carry them up, dump them in the truck. So
That's a spiritual gift. Carrying
carrying heavy things. Yeah, yeah. And she would stand in that creek, and then I remember we were at the landscaping place selling a load of that rock, and the guy would give us $75 cash. Then we found out he's selling it for $250. And we were there, and I saw that he had a bunch of locust rails, split rails like you make split rail fence out of. And I said, "Will you buy split rails too?" And he said, "Yeah." And I went through the property and I sawed and cut down 30 locust trees, and then hand split them all with splitting mauls and wedges while she was at the shoe store. And I did that for a month. All I did was split locust rails. And at the end of that month, we had enough that Little and I loaded them onto the truck bed and carried them down there and sold them for $2 a rail. I think we made maybe $600 off. It was a month of back-breaking labor. And it was fun. It was an adventure. It was exciting. It was, what is the Lord going to do? Like, I don't ever remember a minute of discouragement. It's just like, so yeah, but to answer the question, people that are going to go into ministry, I think that's the answer. You better have a healthy biblical expectation of this is going to be a labor of love. Nobody's going to be watching when the hardest things are happening. There's not going to be reward in this life a lot of times. Sometimes there is, but people are difficult and ministry is hard, but it's worth it if God's calling you to it. And the reward is incredible when you see someone's life changed by the power of the gospel, when you see a marriage healed, when you see a child come to faith in Jesus, when you see people impacted by your faithfulness. The Lord lets you sometimes get to see glimpses. At SWO, we've gotten to see huge glimpses, but sometimes you get to see the fruit of your labor, and it's so joyful and rewarding.
But the reward should be just in being obedient to the calling, and like kind of being content with that. And then if there's, stuff that comes afterwards, that's just like a bonus.
Mm-hmm. One other thing before we move on to that, one thing that I would add to, like the idea of dealing with conflict. We were talking during the break. In my home growing up, when there was conflict, typically my dad would just shut down and he wouldn't talk to my mom. I can remember him sitting for a couple days and not really talking to her, and her saying to me, "Hey, don't treat your wife." And she wouldn't throw him under the bus to me. She would just, when I got older, she would say, "Communicate with your wife, work through conflict," because they wouldn't, and then there would be like a blow up. And then Little came with a different set of experiences, and So when you come together in a marriage, you're bringing so much from what you came out of that you have to start fresh and anew. This is God's story and his plan for our lives, and we got to figure out how to do this biblically. Maybe you have things you can learn from the way your parents did things. Maybe they were faithful, and you can learn from that. Or maybe you came from a really broken home, and you can learn from that. But what you came out of, we challenge men with this a lot at our men's conferences. You don't get to use your upbringing, your background as an excuse to not lead well, to not love well, to not be sacrificial, to not deal with conflict, and to figure out how your wife and your children respond the most to that. It's your job to figure that out.
So, with ministry and just how involved you guys are, how do you guys, do so much, but then, keep a good balance between family, Snowbird, Red Oak, Pinwheel, like, just how do you balance that out, keep a healthy relationship with it all?
Well, I think one thing for me, I think it's good to not have a lot of idle time, like especially for my kids. They like to, if we're just, and like we do value being at home, but also they like to be doing stuff. So like ministry it's so great for them to see us kind of in it all the time and being a part of it. And yeah, I don't.
But yeah, I think that's the key. They're in it with us, sort of. It's not like the thing that goes on outside. It doesn't take me away from family. It doesn't take Little away. We're in it together. There are times where I've got to be away for days at a time. Once we brought Juju and Mo into our home, we scaled way back on how long I would be gone at any given time. It's never more than just a few days. But yeah, bringing them into it together. And then I would say, Little talked about idle time. I think that's important. Like, you have a lot more time in your day than you think. I think people convince themselves that life is so busy. I'm just so busy. I just can't. And it is busy, but what's the option to that? Watching TV, being on social media. If you fill your day and your time and your space with opportunity and you just stay moving, not with just busy work, but there's always something productive to be done. I think you've got a whole lot more time in your day than what you realize if you just make the most of it.
But keeping a Sabbath too, like all the
Mm-hmm.
kids know and they value our Sunday. Like everybody gets to sleep in a bit because our church is in the evening. So I make a big breakfast and we sit over there and we eat together and then we do Bible study and pray and stuff, and then we'll go on a walk if the weather permits. We have 0 day on Sunday. Let our souls catch up to our bodies and
So good.
yeah. So we do really see the importance of that, of like having a day of rest. But the rest of the days, let's go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm always super encouraged just watching you guys live. Like, I feel like a lot of times I'll tell myself a lie of like, oh, that's just how they're wired. But it's like, no, you guys are also making active choices and fighting to, stay busy. It's like our desire is to sit and watch TV and, rest. But I just think it's super cool just how hard you guys push and how many different facets you guys are involved in. And like, that's just your lifestyle.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you guys don't even think twice about it anymore.
I do think it's important. Sorry.
No, you're good. I
do think it's important, like what he said, to involve your kids. So like with the tutoring program I run, Kilby tutored, Tucker tutored, Laylee tutors and was going to tutor yesterday but couldn't make it work. Juju's been here and off and on, and Moses and Malachi are in the program. So it's like, I think the Lord will bring about ministries where your kids are involved, because that's it's a huge part of their like trying to connect to the Lord and understand practically what a believer should do, like in their just normal day, not just going to church and stuff, like what it can look like outside of church is a big deal.
Yeah, because a lot of kids resent the fact. A lot of kids of, there's like the old PK jokes. The pastor's kids, the roughest or the worst kids. But I think a lot of times it's because the ministry demands so much from the family. The kid ends up resenting the church or people, and we've been always very. We haven't done this. Nothing we talked about in this interview have we done perfectly. I want to be clear, but we strive to make sure our kids are involved with us and connected, and that they don't question. This is not a value system where they're competing against the ministry. We're in this together. There's no competition with anything. We're doing life and ministry, and we're a team, and so they feel involved. They feel a part. I think the way they're most valued is not. I don't think they go, oh, our parents. My mom loves me more than Pinwheel. My dad loves me more than Red Oak Church. My parents love me more than SWO. That's not even the way they process things. This is what we do together. We love this ministry together. We love our life. We're in this together. It's all part of the life that we as a family are called to and involved in. And that you have to be intentional with your kids, I think, for that. Especially, Snowbird and Pinwheel are parachurch ministries. If you're in church ministry, it's a little bit more of a struggle, no doubt. You got to be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
I think he has to be more intentional with the kids because, like I do music, then I come home with the kids, especially in the summer. I get done at 9:30. We come home and we're here, and so I think he has to be, as far as a connection with the kids, more intentional with one-on-one time with them. I get that I get a lot of that, but and then as far as in our marriage, I just trust the Lord that when we do get time together, and he does, in the off season he can come home for a little bit, or in the summer it's pretty much go. In the summer it's kind of like I kind of get the mentality of military wife. He's he's just gone, and the Lord, and like you just trust the Lord with it, and like I never feel neglected or like he's negligent. It's just like I remember Jackie Leggett. I don't know if I could remember this quote. She might have to. But it's like, so Jackie Leggett was one of our friends. Her and her husband were missionaries in Mauritania, and they had 4 kids, I think, and her husband was martyred by Al-Qaeda on the street in Mauritania, and we ended up connecting with that family and helping them out. And I remember one day, I was like, oh, no, we were at camp, and I was walking around showing Jackie camp, and a lot of people that, kind of knew her story, a few of them said, how have you handled that with the Lord and everything? And she was talking to me about it. Oh, and people were asking me, like, how do you handle being away, or like Brody being away and stuff? It just kept circulating this question and kind of concept. And I remember her talking to me later, and she said, it's crazy how people will think that a command from an earthly king is an honor, but a command from a heavenly king is a sacrifice. It's an honor, and like she said, and it's crazy because her, like, when Chris was murdered, like one of the most enlarging things in my faith was the first time I talked to her, and it was like her like sturdiness in the Lord and her trust and faith in the Lord was not altered a bit, and it just like blew me out of the water. I couldn't believe it. I was like, the most evident God is enough for me and my kids I've ever seen. Yeah. It was just like there. And so just working in ministry and time restraints and stuff, like I do see if he does have to be away for a bit, like as an honor, I don't see it as sacrifice. And that whole thing in the Isaiah 58, like if you're doing these things I'm asking you to do for the people that are hurting, like that, that I'm wanting to minister to, if you walk into that, there's going to be healing and growth all in your life in different ways. So just be obedient. It's like when the spies went to go look at the land. It was like, 12 of them, and only 2 like believed in the Lord, and the other 10 didn't. But they had already been promised like so many beautiful things. They just didn't believe and trust the Lord with it. And it's like such a big deal, just in every aspect, just trusting the Lord with it. And he's like what I said, when we do have time together, the Lord makes it sweet and great, and it doesn't feel rushed and whatever, and it's always enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and there are seasons where this time of year, it's funny, people have misconceptions about camp. People will say to me all the time, well, y'all slow down now. And it's like,
Can you tell me when that's
what
going to
does that
happen?
look like?
What's the date on that?
It's like it never slows down. But I'm committed. I am very committed. We are committed as a family. I'm personally committed to that Sabbath principle of there's going to be one day out of 7 where I'm not available. My phone's in airplane mode. I'm not gonna be available. And I think the Lord is faithful in that. And then I do everything I can to be here, to go to ball games, to be present either at night when they go to bed or in the morning when they wake up. If I'm not traveling, it's different. And then like I think I mentioned earlier, I don't travel more than 2 or 3 days now. And then I don't travel more than twice a month. So in a 31 day month, a busy month, I might sleep away from home 4 nights. And so we just work at it. Don't get it right every time, but yeah, it's funny because our 3 oldest kids, they really loved time with me. Our 3 and with Little, but they wanted to go on trips with me. They wanted to hang with me. Our 3 younger ones they're much. They want to be right where Little is, and so even when I've asked them, hey, I'm going on this trip, would you like to come?
Crickets chirping.
They don't want to go. Yeah, and I think part of that is the unique needs of different. Every kid's different, and our 3 younger ones did not come into our home biologically. I think there are a different set of needs that they have of Little and one of them is just proximity. They don't want to be far from her. So even when she travels, recently she took our youngest, Moses, to a 21 Pilots concert. They were gone overnight. They drove to Atlanta, saw the show, spent the night with some friends, came back the next day. Juliet, our daughter, who's 15, she's in high school. I could tell it was really impactful that Little was gone that night. Whereas if I'm gone, I don't think, that it doesn't, for a night or two, it doesn't have that same impact. So that gets maybe into a different category of conversation, which is every kid's different. And in terms of parenting, it's important to understand what their needs are, their spiritual and emotional needs, and be on the same page to meet those.
And I think it's important too. Like, I know without a shadow of a doubt, if I went to Brody tomorrow and said, hey, like, this is too much, like, you need to either stop doing Red Oak Pasture or Snowbird or whatever, like, he would be like, okay, well, let's start talking about it. It would be priority, And I remember, like, in the early days, he's like, Little, if you ever start feeling like it's just too demanding, I'll quit and work at Napa. Just let me know. And he every once in a while would just say that, making sure that I understood. And I think that's a really big aspect of it too, was like knowing that if I was prompted that something needed to be pulled away from or stopped or whatever, that he would totally, it wouldn't be like, oh, tomorrow I'm turning in my resignation, but we would start talking through that, and he would consider it like heavily. So I think that's a concept that needs to be established, in ministry too, like, because I think that's where a lot of like hurt can come from with kids, especially, like,
Yes.
dealing with that.
Yeah. Kind of segueing to parenting, will you guys kind of give us like your family structure, like biological kids, adopted kids, when your adopted kids came into your family?
Okay. Yeah, so when we were in the cabin starting camp with no running water, we've been there 3 years, I got pregnant with Kilby, and I was like, I need running water. So that was the first kid.
Can I tell the one story? It's like 5:30 in the morning. It's probably January, it's so cold, and Little's outside in the woods because we don't have a bathroom, and I can hear her puking. She's got morning sickness. I'm stirring, just getting up, stoking the fire up, and she's like, she gets out of the, we would sleep in the winter, we would sleep on a mattress right by the wood stove so we could get that heat, and we would sleep under these huge quilts and down quilts and stuff, and I'm out from under the blankets, and I'm stoking the fire up, and she bails out, runs outside. It's 20 degrees, and I can hear her out there puking. She comes inside, and I said, should we try to find a house with like a bathroom and a toilet?
It's bad.
She said, yeah, that would be good.
Yeah.
You're like 4 or 5 months pregnant.
So that was Kilby.
Mm-hmm.
That was in 2000. I had her in 2000. Then we had Tucker 2 years later. Then we had Laylee 3 years later. So that was it for a bit. And
Couple of miscarriages.
yeah, then we had 2 miscarriages, and then so now Kilby lives in Uganda with her husband. They're missionaries. They've been there almost 4 years, and they have our grandbaby Alma. She's like 5 months old. And then we have Tucker. So he's 20. How old is he? 22. And he plays football at Virginia Tech. And then Laylee is a freshman at North Georgia College right now. So then when they were, I think Kilby was like 14 and Tucker was like 11. Anyway, somewhere in there, the Lord led us to adopt Juliet Moses. So Juju was 4 and Moses was 1. So we lived in Africa for like 3 months. And then Malachi, so Juliet is now a freshman in high school. Mo is 5th grade. And then Malachi, we've been able to have him in our family for 4 years. And he came about through the tutoring program that I run. He was a student in that since he was teeny. But he would kind of be in and out because things were unstable. But and then 4 years ago, I was taking him home, and DSS was getting ready to pull him out of the home. And at that point, I'd formed a good kind of connection with his mom. And so she asked the social worker if I could just take him home with me, which that's one of those, the door's open. It was open. And so I didn't have to pray about it. I think if I would have said, I need to go talk to my husband or pray about it or something like that, I think that window of opportunity probably would have left. I don't know if it would have been available the next day, honestly, because I think they would have got him somewhere. But so she said, can he go home with Little? And I said, that's fine with me. So we have full custody of him now. Both the parents have signed him over to us. So he's in 8th grade.
Sweet.
Yeah, I do think it's been so important to be so trusting of your spouse and being on the same page, because like the Malachi thing, I do think if Little hadn't have felt compelled to bring him home, we wouldn't have gotten him. And I don't want to think about where that would have led, because there's so many horror stories. But she just, without me there, we were like-minded. We hadn't discussed it, but there's a like-mindedness in life that I think is important. I can remember her calling me and saying, well, I've got Malachi Bateman. He's coming home with us. And, of course, we've known him since he was in kindergarten. And we knew his mom when she was in high school. And I remember Little calling me and saying that, and I didn't think a thing about it. And maybe 6 months later, somebody asked me about it, because he just was with us. We didn't wake up that morning planning on bringing a kid home. It was just a day. It was like some random Thursday. And Little called me. I'm at camp. I'm at work. And she said, I got Malachi Bateman. He's coming home with us. And I remember being like, okay, and not thinking anything about it. And then I don't remember thinking, how long is this going to last, or what's the plan? I don't ever remember thinking any of that. Neither one of it's like, it goes back to that thing that hangs in my study. I have one simple philosophy: empty what's full, fill what's empty, scratch where it's just like, just do what. There's this phrase in Scripture you'll see: do whatever your hand finds to do, for the Lord is with you. I think having that a little bit of that mindset towards life,
Mm-hmm.
but being like-minded in that. But yeah, it was about 6 months later, somebody said, "Wait, Little just brought a kid home." I was like, "Yeah, is that weird? Is that like I don't remember thinking that's strange. Just being in step with each other and trusting each other completely."
Yeah. Have you guys always had the desire to, be in step with foster care and adoption? Like, has that always been a desire? How did that look? Especially with Mo and Juju, like, how did those doors open?
Yeah. So we did talk about adopting when we first got married, or
Mhm.
like soon after that. And we actually did have let's have like 3 and then adopt some. But I remember we were just kind of being, like silly, not silly, but just kind of making small talk about it. And then I had Kilby, Tucker, and Laylee. Then I had 2 miscarriages, and I remember being like, "Oh, dang!"
Maybe.
The Lord was like maybe just really like giving us a heads up when we were having that conversation. So soon after, we started filling out the paperwork to adopt.
We got a home. The first thing you do is you get a home study. Got a home study, and then we didn't adopt. We tried to adopt through the state. A little boy named James and a little girl named Mackenzie. They were brother sister, and it didn't work out. And we just kept that home study current till the Lord opened the door. And totally, God was in it. How fast and quick and smooth it went.
Yeah.
There was a lot of hurdles.
Yeah. And with like the fostering, we didn't really talk about that. That the Lord just kind of dropped that in our laps. But that's something where I think that's kind of a hard concept for people, because they maybe feel like they should foster, but they're like, I don't know if my heart would be able to handle like bringing a kid into my home and then loving them and really like getting attached, and then maybe they're pulled out. And I'm like, well, that's just the amount of they need that love. Like, what else is going to be going on during that time? Like,
Yeah.
the Lord's maybe placing you in their life to, show them Jesus, point them to Him, give them some food, some good food, love on them, and then they do leave. But like, that's a calling, and the Lord will, anything He calls you to, He's going to give you the skill set to do it, to handle it. He's not going to call you to something and then leave you.
Yes. So good. It's so true. Because it's basically, I know people would never, this seems harsh to say this, but when somebody says that to me, I think what you're saying is my comfort matters more than this kid's crisis.
Yeah.
That's really what you're saying. You're saying I couldn't bring a kid into my home, and then all the hardship of that I would have to go through for them to be ripped away. And it's like, you're saying I don't want to deal with that discomfort, even though for a week or a month or a year, you could provide this child with gospel investment and stability. And I just think it's important for people to rethink that when they have that thought process.
Yeah, that's good.
And what Lil just said, the Lord's going to provide what you need to go through the difficulty of that if He's called you to it.
Our cat is invading this interview.
So you just have to move her. Just throw her off in the ground.
So what are some key values that you aim to instill in your kids from a young age?
It's kind of two different sets, honestly.
Courage.
Huh?
Courage.
Yeah, like there's a thing on my fridge where Tucker was ugly to Kilby, I think. And it wasn't like he didn't hit her or something. He was probably just jerked to her for something. And so he couldn't spell half the words, but he had to write on a whole sheet of paper, "I will show Kilby honor." So that's something that we have preached all the way through. And, just to really like see your family as family. And I mean, we didn't tolerate anything cross between them at all.
Yeah.
We really didn't.
Remember Kilby and Tuck when you made them stand outside in the cold?
Why does that keep being a recurring theme? Go stand in the cold.
It was funny. It was cold. It was winter time.
Because I hate the cold, so I'm like, punishment. That's punishment.
They were fighting. I don't even remember what it was over, but they were going at it. They were little. And Little made them go stand outside and stare at each other.
No, they had to hold hands like this
hold
and
hands
stare at
and look in each other's
cold.
eyes until she was satisfied that they were uncomfortable enough. It was awesome.
Trauma.
Yet no tolerance, zero tolerance of not looking out for one another, caring for one another, on the school bus, in the school, whatever.
Also, go ahead, go.
No, go ahead.
Oh, it's not funny.
Okay. Well, I was going to tell when Kilby was probably 12 or 13 and Tuck was 10 or 11 and some 14, 15-year-old boys, and Kilby was so sassy. She probably picked the fight, but it was some boys at camp, and somebody called me and said, hey, Tucker just got beat up. And I went down there, and he had jumped. He was like 10. He had jumped about a 14-year-old boy. Don't talk to my sister like that. And he went in on that kid, and that kid just kind of manhandled Tuck. He was so much bigger and older.
Yeah.
He could have hurt him bad, and he didn't. But teaching that defense of one another, but then explaining to them, that's easy. Fighting somebody out there who's being ugly to your sibling, that's easy. Honoring them and caring for them in the walls of this home, that's more difficult.
Yeah. And with the younger three, it's been that, and also like gratitude and being thankful, because the Lord promises like you're gonna have a joyful heart if you can strive for this, and it's been an obvious like promise for me with the Lord, so I like want to push that towards them. Even like I think when Laylee went to college this year, there was still like 2 weeks where my younger three were at home, and so I was busy with them. But then when they went to school, that Monday, I came back here and I was like, oh my gosh, I think I'm sad because Laylee's going. I hadn't really like processed it well, and so I remember I was outside feeding the animals or something, and I was just being a depressed little wimp, and the Lord was like, Little, I've told you, like, be thankful. Seriously, like, can you just do it right now? So I was like praying. I was just thanking the Lord for like Kilby and Greg's health and Alma, and because we didn't know if they would ever be able to have a kid even. So like prayed through that, prayed for Tucker, and was thankful, and just went through so much stuff, and it was just like a wash of that emotion was just gone. So it's like teaching them to be, thankful and grateful, because it just does wonders to your spirit, and they just need to be thankful.
Because
not for
natural.
not for the bonus that you get with it, but just being thankful.
It seems to not come natural for them.
No.
We have to. So we do have. That's something we drill is Thanksgiving.
And they're getting better.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're expressing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the things that courage, honor, work ethic, commitment, finish what you start. There's that, and then relationally, love, gentleness, thankfulness, preferring the other person, just the things that Scripture lays out for the believer.
Yeah. You guys definitely have an interesting dynamic of like, you have 3 that are out of the house and then 3 that are still in the house. So just as you've going through these new seasons, how has your parenting style like changed? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's drastically changed because our first 3, they're just a complete different almost species than our younger 3, because they're highly trauma brained, all 3 of them. So it's like stuff we just naturally thought, oh, we'll just handle them the same way we handled Kilby and Tucker and Laylee, and there's a vast amount of just difference in how you do really most everything. A softer feel to a lot of it. Some stuff you allow that you wouldn't have ever thought you'd allow with, your other 3. And it's like it's been
times where
very humbling.
There's times where we felt, and I definitely have felt like, oh, I'm compromising. I'm being a pushover. I should not let him talk to me like that, or I should not let her do that. But then,
yeah, because innately you're like, okay, this is wrong. But yeah, it's definitely like been a different dependence on the Lord with like discernment and wisdom with how to handle stuff. Yeah. We could talk about this for days.
Yeah, that could be its own. Maybe sometime we could do another episode on that, because I think when people are questioning, people praying about adopting or fostering, there are things that I think it would be helpful to know that we've learned the hard way at times. But it is completely different. It's completely, principles are the same. Want to provide love and nurture and caring, but when they're coming from a background of trauma, as they all three are, and we didn't cause any of that trauma, but we're the ones that God has called to help them learn to navigate that, the healing and the strength that can come out of it. It's pressed us to you realize what you don't know,
Yeah. And even just like times have changed, like from when Kilby and Tuck and Laylee were growing up to now when they are like technology, and
it's a
I'm
double
sure
whammy.
that's just a lot to handle. What is y'all's approach on how much you share with your kids concerning hard family decisions or personal struggles?
I have a word picture that this is not going to answer exactly, because it varies from situation to situation, what we might share with them, what we might not. But I remember hearing a pastor talk about this years ago, where if you took your child and your child was 3 or 4 years old and you took them out, I think about, we took Kilby and Tuck when they were real little. We backpacked in on Big Snowbird, and I was carrying one of them in a backpack carrier and the other one on my shoulders. And we hiked in 5 miles, and Little had all of our gear in her backpack. And so we're carrying everything. And then a few years later, we did the trip, and each of them carried a small backpack and walked themselves. And their backpack had like their food. Was it. We're carrying all the. And then if you then fast forward that to their teenagers, now everyone's carrying their own weight, but I'm navigating the trip. So as they mature and advance and progress, they get more weight put into their backpack. They get more responsibility for their journey. It's like that in life. It's like there are some things that they're not ready to carry the weight of, so we're going to carry that weight. But then as they mature and grow older, it's about the transfer of more and more weight and responsibility that we lay on them, and so they feel the weight of certain family decisions. And there are some things that are thrust on you, like like when Little's dad died, they lost their granddad. Well, you don't get to not navigate that with them. So how do you have those conversations? I remember I have a nephew whose father was killed when my nephew was about 3, and I remember a well-intentioned, well-meaning family member saying to this 3-year-old kid, your daddy's gone because Jesus wanted your daddy to come be with him. Well, all that did was tell this 3-year-old kid, well, why Jesus take my daddy away? He's selfish. He's my dad. Why does Jesus have anything he wants? Why has he got my dad? And I remember thinking, oh, that needs to be reworded. And I went and sat down with that kid and explained, we live in a world that's broken and fallen, and people die and daddies get killed, and it's terrible. And it was not God's design. Because it was not his design, but it happened anyway, he made a way for us to be able to get through it. It's because he loves us. And then, so thinking, how do we navigate difficult situations? Because there's some things you can't keep them from having to bear. And our 3 younger kids, we can't keep them from having to bear the memories of abuse, physical abuse, or drugs in the home, or abandonment and pain and hunger, but we can help them learn how to navigate the healing of that. And so I don't think it's a black and white, cut and dry answer. It's constantly figuring out how to help them navigate each season.
A lot of prayer.
Lots
I
of
just
prayer.
pray the Lord and hope, just like give me a peace one way or the other. I do think it's always been really a sweet time with my kids when I do make space for them to see the Lord work, and or like where I do have to apologize, or like ask, for forgiveness for something, and it's like always a sweet time, like stuff like that, or even just like letting them know of needs in my life, or in somebody's life, letting them creating that space for them to realize that, and then just watch what the Lord does and how he's faithful, and then walking them through that, and then the contentment of just how we respond has a lot to do with how we're content with what the Lord did, or not if the circumstance changed or for the better, but how we responded to it. That's where like our contentment can be, and walking them through that. It's been big, but yeah, just praying through all that.
Lots of prayer.
Yeah.
That's an important principle. I think you feel this sense of, well, I handled this kid in this situation this way, so I have to make sure I'm consistent. Consistency doesn't mean you handle every situation with each kid the same way. Train up a child, Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. The idea is understand how your kid's wired and bent, and the complexities of that human being. How are they going to learn? How are they going to respond? And as a parent, apply biblical principles to how you discipline, raise, instruct, teach, but understand that each kid's different, and there's a uniqueness to how you might navigate certain things. One kid, we've got some of our kids are so strong and independent-minded, and then others are very fragile in the way that they navigate conflict, and so just understanding the difference.
Somebody asked, any tips for parenting strong-willed toddlers?
I remember telling Austin and his wife Tara, they had just had Mila, and I think Austin was like asking me, Little, you got any tips or something like that. And I remember just saying, well, like the terrible twos are usually terrible because that kid's will probably could have already been broke before that, but the parents have kind of thought it was cute when they're disobeying, and all of a sudden they're two and it's not cute anymore. So like just being like really in tune with the first time you see that, like that reared head and that will just like showing itself, like, not just turn them over and give them a spanking, but however it needs to be handled, just addressing it and like starting to work through, some obedience and stuff, so that I think when they're two is just when it gets ugly, but it could have already been going before that. So yeah, I would say like just really being observant early on, like before they're a toddler.
I have
what
two.
Is a toddler, like 2?
2, 3. Yeah, I think 2 to 3. I have 2 funny memories of you, with one with Kilby, one with Juju. Kilby was still in a high chair. It's the first time he ever disciplined her. And we were in our little table in that little rock house that we moved out of the cabin into when you were having her. We moved from that cabin with no running water into a little 700 square foot, 100-year-old little house that we rented for $250 a month. Yeah. And lived there for a decade till Kilby was 10. But I remember she's in her high chair. I'm across the table. You're feeding her. And I don't remember what she did. She wanted something, but she exerted herself.
Yeah.
And I remember I had looked down and I heard, and I was like, I looked over there and remember she got those big old eyes anyway. Her eyes are so big and bulgy, and her eyes were, this is a 10, 11-month-old baby sitting in a high chair, and her eyes were like, pow! I felt like they were big as bowling balls. And then I don't remember how she responded after that, but I know things changed that day. Yeah. And then I remember Juju, we got Juju, she's 4, and she'd never had a bath. They would just sponge bathe, and they didn't have running water, and she came out of a third world context. And I remember Little had put about that much bath water, and it was warm. So warm bath water, everything is over sensory, and she had been in there for an hour, and it was like, no, it's time to get out and go to bed. And I heard Little in there saying, it's time to get out of the tub and go to bed. And she said something. She had the thick accent. She said, no, mama, like that. And I heard 3 swats on the butt. And it was like the attitude was adjusted. She marched out of there. It says 3 quick swats on the rear end. But parenting takes courage. And if you think it's cute for a toddler to exert their will over you, wait till they're a 6 foot tall 16-year-old. Now's the time to do. Now's not the time to get into the how-tos of all of that. But I would just say have courage and address it, because it's going to be harder to address later than it is when they're 2 or 3. That was a funny in this whole thing that was a question that came at the end. How do we deal with our toddler? Wait till you've got one boy chasing the other one with a hunting knife around the yard.
That was last week.
That was last week.
Courtney Williams asks, craziest Laylee May story.
There's a lot.
Laylee May's our 19-year-old or 18, gonna be 19.
She's gonna be 19 soon. My favorite Laylee May story, I have two. One is a broken arm and a split chin. My mom was over here, and Laylee was about 7, maybe younger. She might have been 5. But they were going up and down the loft. And my mom said, okay, I want to know when she falls and breaks her arm. She said something like that. My mom wasn't like, don't let her be climbing on that ladder, because my mom raised a family. She was more laughing like, okay, I want to know when you end up in the ER. And like 2 days later, we hear a crash, and Laylee had broken her arm and split her chin, and we're at the ER. I remember sending my mom a picture. But my favorite Laylee May story is of like crazy. She loves to cliff jump. From the time she was 7 or 8, she would jump off really high stuff into the lake, and that's one of our family's favorite outings, is to go cliff jumping, swimming, these really cool places. And we were at Nantahala Lake. We were on a camp. We were in the pontoon, and we were out at the cliffs. You know what story I'm telling? There's a bunch of boys that were not from here. They were there on the lake vacationing, and it was about 5 or 6 guys that looked to be probably about 20 years old. And it's about, the water level was down. It's about a 40-foot cliff, and they were all trying to get their nerve up to jump off of it. And Laylee was probably 12, and she dove out of our boat, swam, it's 200 feet deep, swam to the rock, climbed up the cliff. And I said, hey, if you boys will move out of the way, my little girl's going to jump off that cliff. And they're like, huh? And they backed up, and they didn't know she was behind them. She runs, splits those 5 or 6 guys, and launches off that, just like this, and hits the water. And every one of those dudes jumped within the next 20 seconds, That's one of my favorites.
Mine's probably, our family went to these waterfalls, and I think maybe Tuck caught a big old crawdad. And, like, the thing with Laylee is you could say, we always do the thing, what's the least amount of money you would take to do this or do that? And Laylee will always be like, no money, and she'll just do it. And she will do about anything. And somebody says, somebody eat that? And, everybody's like, no way. Tucker's like, no. And Laylee just walks over there and grabs it, puts it in her mouth, and just starts chewing it. And everybody's freaking out. And then she, like, shows it that it's, chewed up on her tongue, and then and swallows it, and Tucker's like over there about to just have a heart attack. He's like grossing out, but she just did it. We have a video of it somewhere. I love that one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Going back to that cast story, this is kind of gross, but Lily told me that you made her a big old steak.
Yes.
To make her feel better, like cut up pieces of steak, and Lily ate it all. And then that night she woke up and threw up the steak, and it got inside of her cast.
Yeah,
so
it was
bad.
awful. So I heard a commotion, and I heard her come run out of her room. Well, she tried to keep it, so she started puking. She did this. Well, it went right down. So I was gagging. I couldn't get it out. I don't know if I made you, but it was still, you couldn't get it.
Yeah.
So she only had to wear it 2 weeks, and we go, and they're taking it off, and the lady's like, man, this has a really rancid smell to it. And I'm like,
Decomposing.
I did
beef.
say it was awful.
That's so funny.
And
Because she loves steak, so I'd made her steak.
I remember for her 15th birthday, instead of a birthday cake, it was a big T-bone steak with a 1 and a 5 candle in it. I have a picture of that on my phone.
So great. Last year when she was a senior, she had dual enrolled, so she didn't have to go to school. So every day we would work out together. We go to the gym about 11. I would go to work from 8 to 11, meet her at the gym. We would do a workout together, come home, and 3 or 4 days a week I'd grill us some steaks. Because you can buy these little mini ribeyes, or you can get them from Go Grocery for pretty cheap. And we would split one for lunch. We'd split a ribeye. So fun.
Well, sweet. that's just about all the questions we have. Unless you guys have any more, any thoughts?
You have thoughts?
Nope.
Nothing. You did good,
My
Mom.
brain's fried.
I know, we just grilled y'all for 2 hours.
Yeah, I just say for everybody that's listening that's going to come to the marriage retreat, we're excited for folks to come and just to be able to share what the Lord's laid out in Scripture for how to honor Him in our marriages. But I think the one thing that I think would be like a banner over all of this is that we were created for God's glory, and whether your work or your hobby, your sports, your academics, if you're a kid, your career, if you're a professional, I would say especially for mothers, because I see a lot of moms with small kids sort of idolize their children. I think this is something that's easy to do. See so many moms especially find their identity in their children. Dads will find their identity in their kids' sports performance, or dads will find their identity in their work or whatever. It's like, if we can remember that my children don't give me my identity, my spouse doesn't, my work doesn't. It's like I was created for God's glory. My work fits into that work that He's doing in me. My marriage fits into that work He's doing in me. My parenting fits into that. Ultimately, one day I'm going to stand before the Lord and give an account for how I've lived my life. And probably the biggest component of that for married people is going to be, what kind of husband was I? What kind of wife was I? How did I, if marriage is a reflection of the gospel, if it's a shadow of the reality of our relationship with Christ, then every single day I'm living for God's glory in the way that I live as a husband or a wife. And then on the other side of that, the other thing I would say, the last thing I would say is, you're going to mess it up a lot. You're going to mess it up a lot. And that's where we have to have grace for one another, and just know your best day of marriage, you're going to make mistakes, and God's grace is sufficient for you, and your grace needs to be sufficient for your spouse. And don't set expectations on them that the Lord doesn't set for them in your life. And just choose to be joyful and happy and thankful, and live your life in a way that honors the Lord.
Sweet. I think that's it.
Good.
Thanks for listening to No Sanity Required. Please take a moment to subscribe and leave a rating. It really helps. Visit us at swoutfitters.com to see all of our programming and resources. And we'll see you next week on No Sanity Required.